Welcome back to the conversation. I'm David Schuster. Elon Musk, the billionaire, relatively new owner of Twitter, seems to be welcoming back a lot of accounts that had been deactivated, including those that seem to belong to a number of neo-Nazis. And as a result, Twitter seems to become an even more hateful place to read messages, to send messages, to interact with other folks. Here to talk about this is David Gilbert. He is a senior reporter for Vice News who's been watching some of the hateful stuff online, particularly on Twitter. David, what have you seen over the past couple of weeks?
It's been incredible, really, David, to see what Musk has done with Twitter since he came back. Almost immediately when he came back, he reinstated a number of accounts that had been banned for a long time on Twitter because of the hate speech that they had been spreading. So almost immediately it became a much worse place, if you can imagine that, because Twitter already was a pretty toxic environment for a lot of people on there. But his policies have made it much worse for people. The level of hate speech has increased. The content moderation has evaporated effectively because most of the people who are doing the content moderation are no longer working for Twitter because Musk fired them. And his policy really is to allow everyone pretty much back on the platform with a few exceptions and allow them to say whatever they want. And rather than deleting the content, he says that it just will be not promoted and it will be hard to find, but the content remains there. So overall, it's a pretty much more toxic place than it was prior to Musk taking over.
And he has engaged with some of these, right-wing white supremacists as well, either through retweets or through asking them questions or encouraging them to come back on.
Yeah, he's engaged with them and given them credence and boosted their credibility. He's been engaging with one of the very early accounts he engaged with was an account called Cat Turd, which is a far-right trolling account which spreads anti-LGBTQ narratives. He engaged with libs of TikTok. He's engaged with Tim Pool, the far-right podcaster, and he's giving these people a platform and giving them credibility by engaging with them, retweeting their accounts, and it just seems that he is doing it because he thinks it's going to create more of an engaged environment on Twitter. And he said that the number of people engaging with Twitter has grown since he's taken over, and his policy seems to be let me talk to the most toxic or the most people who will kind of cause the most reaction possible on Twitter.
So in other words, for business purposes, never mind his own sort of personal views, for business purposes, he wants Twitter to essentially be the place, the platform where people engage with each other, even if it's a cesspool. So I guess I sort of see it business-wise, but is there a downside as well? Because I mean, it seems like a lot of people have now left Twitter because Elon Musk has sort of opened up this platform to all these lunatics.
Yeah, it seems to be a very short-sighted policy, because while I'm sure the number of people looking at Twitter on a daily basis has grown, because it's kind of like a soap opera, effectively turning on Twitter every day and seeing what Musk is doing now or who's back on Twitter and what he's allowing on the platform. In the long run, it's going to be devastating for the platform. The soccer World Cup is on at the moment, and it's typically one of the busiest times for Twitter over the past decade. It has been a huge driver of traffic to Twitter when people engage on the platform and talk about the games that are happening. But according to one report this week, the amount of advertising that they expected from the World Cup was down 80% compared to expectations, which shows just how toxic it has become and how some advertisers at least, are staying away because they just don't want their adverts next to white supremacist or anti-Semitic content.
It's so interesting because we've seen that happen before in terms of cable news or talk radio, that if a host or a show becomes too hot, there's a lot of pressure on the advertisers, even if you can still reach millions of people, to not advertise, not support that program. And it sounds like there's a similar effect now, a similar awareness in the advertising industry that, if you really want to get sort of neutral content that you're advertising next to, Twitter's not the place.
Yeah, and there was a sustained push initially when Musk took over and his policies became clear to kind of pressure advertisers, just as they've been pressurized before, to kind of pull their content from different cable news shows, as you said. But it's hard to see how advertisers in the long run are going to stick with Twitter if Musk continues down this road, where this week alone he brought back Andrew Anglin, who is one of the most notorious neo-Nazis in the US, who was banned from Twitter nearly a decade ago and hasn't been allowed back on it since. He's the publisher of the Daily Stormer, and he is without doubt one of the best known white supremacists in the US. And the fact that Musk decided that he was someone who should be brought back onto the platform really gives you an indication of the direction that Musk seems to be taking it in. And it's hard to see how advertisers in the long run are going to kind of decide that this is okay.
Is there a direct competitor to Twitter that maybe Musk was looking to try to squelch? I mean, was there a platform or place where a lot of the far right were sort of communicating with each other that he thought, okay, I'm going to open back up Twitter in order to tamp that down?
I guess like the far right typically has congregated in a couple of places, most notably probably Telegram and also Gab to a certain extent. But those aren't really competitors to Twitter. They're not a place where open conversations happen. They're not a place where people go to find out news or to see different opinions. People there join closed groups and they get kind of an echo chamber effectively of their viewpoint kind of pushed back to them. And even in the weeks since Musk took over, a lot of people have been looking at Mastodon or a couple of other places where they think maybe could be a Twitter alternative. But Twitter is unique, I think. It's something that can't easily be replicated in the short term. And that's like obviously an issue for a lot of groups who like to use Twitter to communicate with each other. They don't automatically have somewhere else to go. And that's, I think, why Musk paid 44 billion for Twitter in the first place, is because it is unique and there is huge potential there. But the fact that he has kind of taken it in a very specific direction means that it's going to be hard if it does kind of over time go away or become very much less popular to find somewhere else for these communities to thrive.
One of the greatest concerns that people have with the social media is that a particular platform will be used by people who might organize the next January 6th, or the next mass shooting, or the next firebombing of a synagogue. Does Musk seem to have a plan in place should Twitter, and not just being used to, for people to communicate with each other, their sort of feelings, but maybe any sort of organizational plans that some of these lunatics have to actually carry out violence? What does Musk do at that point?
I think that's one of the problems, that his policy on the content that's up there is to, rather than take it down or remove it, is to just to not show it in search results. And as a result, the content remains there, and therefore it can be pointed to by different groups and people can still find it, can still see it. It's not, Twitter's never really going to be a place where it's going to be used for the kind of organization that we saw on January 6th. That is going to happen in more private channels like Telegram or WhatsApp groups or other encrypted channels where the public can't easily find it. But what Twitter will do is allow the viewpoints that drive people, that radicalize people into these groups. It will become a conduit for that. And that was something that Twitter had worked hard to kind of stop or to try and remove in the years leading up to Musk's takeover. But that now seems to be eradicated effectively in a couple of weeks, so that the types of viewpoint that we're seeing spread on Twitter now could very easily radicalize people and drive them into more extremist groups in other platforms where it's very hard to see exactly what's going on.
Is Twitter still profitable, or has it been profitable over the last several months since Musk has made these changes? I mean, or is it still sort of a losing sort of proposition?
I can't see how it can be profitable since Musk took over. While he says that daily engagement is up, advertisers are clearly scared about what's happening now. Some advertisers, there was talk that Apple had pulled out of advertising on Twitter. That was not the case. They've actually increased their amount of advertising in November compared to the previous month. So advertisers are still on the platform for now, but I think if we're going to continue to see Musk push in the direction that he has been pushing already and promote the types of accounts that he is promoting and allow the type of content that we're seeing to stay on the platform, then that's going to be a big problem for Musk and for Twitter. And I think his investment is quickly going to diminish.
Has there been much pressure or pushback against Musk from, and I'm thinking of the Southern Poverty Law Center or the Anti-Defamation League or all these groups that try to track the sort of right-wing hate and try to make sure that it's sort of monitored and sort of filtered out of certain places? How is Musk reacting to whatever some of these watch groups are doing?
He's like, initially when they raised concerns about his policies, he engaged with them and he met with them. But it seems that he did it to kind of appease them in a certain way, but he has just completely ignored what they've called on. They've repeated their calls for him to try and remove the type of hate speech that still, continues to pervade on the platform. He claims that the level of hate speech has dropped since he's taken over, but several independent groups, like the groups you mentioned, have published reports about the level of hate speech, anti-Semitic speech, homophobic slurs, and they've all increased dramatically since Musk took over by their count. And Musk, when he made his claims, did not provide the actual data to back up what he said.
And there's certainly a lot of anecdotal evidence that in fact it's become a much more sort of hateful cesspool of conversations that are going on and literally screaming at each other. But in any case, David Gilbert, he's a senior reporter for Vice News. David, thanks so much for doing this. We appreciate it.
You're welcome.
And that'll do it for this edition of The Conversation. On behalf of Mark Gillespie, Bart Kyle, Asher Cofield, Gina Kim, and the entire gang at the Young Turks, I'm David Schuster. Thanks for watching.